Okay, so I'm going to read out a report. Um, it's printed in Time magazine, but it's concerning BBC and CNN. Um, BBC journalist Martin Patience lived up to his name today while covering the trial of Chinese activist Xu Shiyong in Beijing. Patience was harassed by police officers and plainclothes thugs, but he kept his cool and continued with his live shot. Other journalists, including reporters David Mackenzie of CNN and Mark Stone of Sky News, were also manhandled outside the courtroom. Stone's video can be seen here, and I'll give a link to that site. CNN's camera was broken and its TV coverage blacked out. Mackenzie also said he was detained. Supporters of Xu outside the court were taken away by police. The irony, of course, is that street-side tussles only called attention to what was happening indoors. A well-known legal scholar who campaigns for government transparency, Xu is charged with gathering crowds to disrupt public order and will very likely face jail time. In court today, he stays silent to protest proceedings he likened to a piece of theatre. Late last year, some of Xu's supporters, including a trio of activists, were detained for taking a picture of themselves holding a sign that asked China's top leaders to disclose their wealth, were put on trial. There's been no verdict. Since April of 2013, more than a dozen people associated with Xu's New Citizens movement have been detained. The courtroom drama comes on the same day the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists released a report linking China's top rulers to offshore tax havens. More on that here. Okay, so this is a report about a trial going on in China, which is of course the communist authorities have tried to censor, as they always do. And it's talking about how Western reporters from Western news agencies are being harassed. This should hardly be any surprise. It's what the Chinese regime always does whenever there's a sensitive trial concerning human rights or corruption or anything like that. But I want to address an issue which has sometimes been brought up by Chinese netizens, and that is the allegation of Western media bias. Now, I'm not saying there isn't any bias at all, but I think this is a factor that is overlooked when we have this debate about bias. How can Western journalists be expected to have a thorough report, a comprehensive report on anything happening in China when they face these sort of threats and this sort of intimidation from thugs who are clearly employed by the CCP? The simple answer is they can't. They cannot be 100% objective. So I think it's just quite hypocritical, or at least unfair, to accuse Western journalists of being biased when they are not in a position where they can give a thorough analysis of the situation. By contrast, Western countries are for the most part pretty tolerant of critique. Now, what I mean by that is news channels that are pretty critical of the West, such as Russia Today, and Chinese news channels, are not barred from reporting in this country. And they certainly wouldn't face intimidation from plainclothes thugs employed by the government. That's a simple fact. So my message to Chinese netizens who want to vent about Western media bias is, if you want Western media outlets to not be biased, which I think is a debatable term anyway, then put pressure on the Chinese government to allow more objectivity, to allow critique, and then, if you still think they're biased, fair enough. But don't accuse Western journalists of being biased if they are not given the freedom to report and do their job. And it once again just shows how paranoid and intolerant China is as a society. Maybe I shouldn't say as a society, as in terms of freedom of expression and free press. Well, free press is non-existent in China. But I think this also shows something else. The fact that this man, Xu Shiyong, a very brave man, has been sentenced to 4 years, just shows that we have to be very careful about believing Xi's reforms, because it's a very disputable thing that there are reforms in every area, it's quite clear that critics of the Chinese government will still face persecution. This is another example. So this is just a quick video to say that I think it's a bit unfair and hypocritical to talk about Western media bias when Western journalists are not given the freedom to do their job. And this was the same during the whole Beijing fiasco 6 years ago. The West was once again accused of bias, but they weren't given freedom to do their job. So that's something to think about.